federal government says Naira for crude policy remains in place. Kuwait faces domestic worker shortage as 30,000 workers leave in 18 months. President Donald Trump says U.S. is in talks with 4 different groups on sale of TikTok. Plus, oil prices live on concerns over tariffs and slowdown fears. The program is Business Express, reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Neka, your guide. Now, global energy transition is undergoing a crucial shift. The pressure on the energy sector to keep pace with this rising demand has never been more urgent. According to the U.S. Department of Energy, energy demand has tripled over the last decade and is expected to double or even triple again by 2028. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump's protectionist policies have roiled markets across the world, imposing and then delaying tariffs on its biggest oil suppliers, Canada and Mexico, while also raising duties on Chinese goods. What does this mean for Nigeria amid 2025 budget implementation? Joining me to discuss this is Mr. Kaka, National Program Coordinator, Trade Network Initiative. You're welcome to Business Express, sir.
Thank you very much for having me. Good morning, listeners.
Let's start with the rumors making the rounds that the Naira for crude oil arrangement with local refineries has been suspended. What was your initial reaction when you heard it?
Well, you know, things you read in the media, sometimes you take them with a pinch of salt. Just like you heard is what I also heard. And good enough, the authorities have come out to debunk it and said that government is actually not doing away with that. I think it's a good development. The implementation of it is what we are actually not seeing on ground, because rumors are also making rounds that the necessary authorities are also demanding not Naira but hard currency for them to actually supply crude, the details of which we do not have. But I think it's a good development for government to reaffirm it, so that if there is any other form of implementation contrary to this reaffirmation, it can also be brought to the public space for proper scrutiny and see why is there a variation between government policy and what the reality on ground is.
All right, the 2025 budget is based on economic assumptions, including a crude oil production target of 2.06 million barrels per day at a benchmark price of $75 per barrel. How realistic is this target, given persistent challenges like oil theft, pipeline vandalism, and investment deficits?
Okay, thank you very much. I think when you talk about how realistic it is, for me, I think like you rightly pointed out, budgets are just mere estimations. And that's why people speak of budget credibility. You should make a projection, taken as a projection, to be as close as possible to reality. In other words, if there are going to be any variation, plus or minus variations, they should be minor and not significant, because where they become significant, it becomes a problem for the implementation of that particular budget itself. And that's exactly what we're seeing on ground. Beyond the vandalism, I don't think we're having much of occurrences of it and investments being a challenge. With the PIA in place, we think investment would actually come into it. We've seen Dangote's, modular refineries and all the rest also being given opportunity to play within that particular space. I think it's a good development, but in terms of what is going on at the moment, I don't think that budget is realistic. Like the parameters you read out, which is correct, $75 US per barrel, 2.60. At the moment, we are doing 1.7 million barrels per day, which is far from what we're actually trying to achieve. It's that we should ensure that the shift the variation should not be that too significant. And what we have at the moment is the 75 US dollar to a barrel, as at the time we did the budget, was also not too realistic because it was not driven by the true forces of the price of oil, as at that time was not driven by the forces of demand and supply. OPEC was actually an influence of what we have at that point in time, between $70 and $80 per barrel. And now they are trying to pull out that, they are trying to unwind that decision which they made to see how they could actually stabilize the price. And once they pull out that, you are rest assured that we'll be going for something 60 or below it, which will be far, far different from the 75 US dollar we have benchmarked our 2025 budget.
Yeah, but what about the potential impact of crude oil volatility on revenue projections? We have seen prices fluctuate wildly in recent years. From your perspective, how concerned should we be?
I think we should be concerned because, like about 4 days ago, the oil price dropped from about 84.02 to about 67.21. That is, if you compare that 67.21 to our 75 US dollars per barrel, you are dealing with a major 10.7% drop in your revenue, because the current 54.99 trillion naira budget which we have for 2025, 36.35 trillion of it is to be serviced by revenue from oil, and that's to tell it's to be. I mean, that's the revenue we're projecting for this country. The rest of them are actually deficits, and 56% of that revenue of 36.35 trillion naira, which is the revenue we're expected to get, is to be sourced from oil exports. So if the receipts from oil and prices are not what we expect it to be, you know that the full implementation of that particular budget will definitely suffer. And that's what we have at the moment. And the reason why that will be is what is going on at the moment. As against, again, the decision by OPEC itself. You remember 2020, OPEC said, look, let us have an initial cut. And they made all their members to actually cut about 5.76% of global supply. And that actually was to help shore up the price, because there was weak demands, there was high inflation, high interest rate going on at the moment. Then 8 of them also went further to actually say, let's cut further our supply by 2.2 million barrels per day. And all this reduction in aggregate supply to the market was intended to bring stability to it. Now, OPEC Plus has said, starting from April 2025, we are going to unwind. It means those voluntary cuts and initial cuts which we did to stabilize price, we are going to bring the productions back into the market, and it's going to last for another 18 months. Your budget is 12 months. The implementation of this one is for 18 months. So it's telling you that once they do that, commencing from April, the price of oil in the international market will definitely drop, because there is now an increase in supply into the market. And that will actually create a problem for our full implementation of the budget, because our 75 US dollars will be also unrealistic at that point in time.
All right. How will the implementation of the Petroleum Industry Act, PIA, impact the ability of Nigeria to meet its production goals?
I think it's a positive one, because, with that bill, you've seen that yes, government has allowed people now, the Dangotes and the likes of them have actually come into that particular space, trying to do it. Government is encouraging investment, because it's now reducing the realities and the tax rates that is expected of these investors to actually pay. Again, it's also trying to see, look, I will only remain as a regulator, build the regulatory framework, leave the market to actually run itself. So I think it's a good development. And with government, the national oil companies producing their own, if we have all the refineries producing, and the private ones also coming into space to produce, I'm sure Nigeria can meet the aggregate production and supply, not only to the domestic market, but internationally. And so we're likely to become a major player in the international supply of oil, all things being equal.
All right. So what reforms are needed in Nigeria's energy sector to attract more investment, and how might the 2025 budget support this?
Okay, in terms of reforms, I think there are ongoing reforms at the moment. There's a huge dependence, like I told you, about the revenue we're expected to derive this year. 56% of it is coming from the oil sector, which means we need to do a lot with the non-oil sector to actually be able to fully implement the 2025 budget, and that's about diversification. Not holding brief for government, but I think there are attempts in the agricultural sector government is almost trying to conclude by mid this year the recapitalization of the Bank of Agriculture, which is the main institution designed to actually assist the development of the agri sector, particularly now that the Development Finance Department of the Central Bank that was ready to give loans into the agri sector has actually been wiped off with the current administration, so they can actually focus on monetary policy issue. So I think it's a good development for us if we're able to actually follow it through to the end of it.
Okay, so what are the potential impacts of increased domestic refining on the global energy markets?
Oh, it will be interesting because right now, see, the devaluation of the currency we have at the moment is also a function of the fact that there is pressure on the limited forex we have for the importation of the crude, for the importation of refined product. So once we begin to have national refinery, local refineries refining our products, you also know that the pressure will reduce. And there's also the possibility, not only the availability of it in the market, you don't seek use anymore, even though the price has gone up. But there's also the tendency of, in the long run, having the prices of energy actually dropping, because a lot of people are now coming into the space producing, and so the aggregate supply to the market will actually increase. And employment will also actually be generated within that space. So it's going to be a good development, and it will also make us a good player, a stronger player in the international market, because we're not only now selling crude, it is possible for us, particularly for neighboring countries within our sub-region here, to also begin to supply them the refined crude oil and bring in the forex for national development, as it were.
How will the Nigerian government and net zero emissions goals affect the country's oil and gas sector?
Okay, fine. There's always been that speculation that, look, if we begin to look at alternative source of energy because we want to drop carbon emission to about zero, it might begin to affect them. You're also saying that the likes of Dangote, the shrewd businessman, has also done the wrong calculation, because coming into that space with the multi-million-naira factory he has, it's also saying if we begin to look for alternative source of energy, he might begin to lose investment. The truth is, new energy sources will begin to come in, solar energy like we have at the moment, all that kind of forms of energy, but you can never in its entirety, in the next 10, 20 years, wipe out the need for fossil fuel energy. And that is the truth about it. What it will happen in the long run is that as these alternative sources of energy begin to come into space, yes, the demands for this particular one will drop and it will drop the price, but we will still continue to have a market for that particular energy. Now, to say the net zero emission does not mean you want to see a society where there is no carbon emission. It's to see how you can actually reduce the emission of carbon to something that nature can take care of, because it has always taken care of it. And other modalities and measures that governments are putting in place can also absorb the excess carbon emission we're having. So we're trying to see how we can bring it. It can never come to zero anyway. And that's the whole idea about the net zero emission. And Nigeria has made a commitment against 2060 to actually fully have actually gone migrated to that level and achieve the net zero emission of carbon in Nigeria.
All right, very quickly, how might a change in the global energy market affect Nigeria's ability to pay its debts?
Well, if the current budget of that we have at the moment of 54.99 trillion, you are aware that a substantial part of it, about 14 something thereabout, 14.32 or so thereabout, is to be sourced. It's what is going to be used as borrowings that we need to, because the revenue coming in from the oil is about 34 point something. The remaining of it, government is having to actually borrow it. And that's about 40% of that particular budget itself, if I'm not wrong. Government will tell you, debt management office will tell you that our debt to GDP is actually we've not crossed the boundaries of concerns. It's still sustainable. But I think it might be a wrong metrics. If you begin to look at our revenue as against the quantum of it we use in servicing debt, you know it's a cause for concern, particularly what we have, borrowing almost about 14.32 trillion naira to finance your budget. With the current energy crisis that may begin to happen, with the decisions that ECOWAS are taking, the decisions to actually mediate in the crisis between Russia and Ukraine. Mind you, Russia is the third largest exporter of oil and is not a member of OPEC. It's not regulated by anybody. So it can come and pump into the market and just crash the price. I think it will be a very serious one for us. And it calls for concern, an alternative way of generating resources to finance our budget.
Mr. Chris Kaka, National Program Coordinator of Trade Network Initiative, thank you very much for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.